let's move on. The Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, or NUPRC, has announced that the recent divestment by Nigerian Agric oil company to Oando Petroleum and Econo Nigeria to Chapal Energies have received ministerial approval. The transactions conducted under the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021 were processed according to regulatory standards and required thorough evaluations to ensure compliance with legal and environmental guidelines. In contrast, Mobil Producing Nigeria Unlimited's proposed divestment to Seplat Energy Offshore Limited is still under review. The approval process is ongoing and adheres to the 120-day timeline mandated by the PIA. The NUPRC emphasized that all divestments are handled with strict compliance to regulatory frameworks, ensuring transparency and due diligence. And that's the latest on the Nigeria Oando deal. Now, in the meantime, Nigeria has recorded an aggregate GDP growth of 60.93 trillion naira in the second quarter ended June, and that's according to the latest economic report released earlier today by the Bureau of Statistics. The report shows an overall GDP growth of 3.19% against the 2.8% which was posted in the January to March period. That growth was led in the main by 3.53% advance posted by the services sector, while agriculture falters to 1.4% in the period under review. Now let's get more breakdown of the latest GDP report as we bring on Paul Alaje, the senior economist at SPM Professionals. A good Monday evening to you, sir, and welcome to Arise Exchange.
Thank you so much for having me, sir.
How much of a good news is Nigeria's latest second quarter GDP growth of 3.1%?
Well, we should be saying it's a good news, but for inflation, that stole significant parts of this growth from us. When you look at the nominal number, over 60 trillion naira, approximately 60.93 trillion naira, compared to 52 trillion naira. When you look at the reports presented by the Bureau of Statistics, nominally speaking, we have 16.94% year on year, speaking nominally. But when we make provision for inflation to find the real GDP, that number 16.9% reduced significantly to 3.19%. So what is the big elephant in the room? Inflation. And when you look at what inflation has done, you know that we should have had much bigger, more robust than what we have. But of course, because of the number. But to look at the number very quickly, you saw that what took the lead here remained service sector, as it took over 50% of the total GDP, share of GDP in Nigeria. Crop production under agriculture has approximately 22%, but crop alone took significant proportion of over 20.35% as its contribution to GDP. So when we say that agro, we need to do more in that regard. So for me, when you look at this 3.19%, we know that industry is also there, and we saw quite a number of other things. But by and large, President Bola Tinubu is aiming to achieve a minimum of 6% GDP growth rate. This is half into what he has to do for the year. Of course, as against expecting about 6%, in Q2, we have seen 3.19%. It means if we must go by this number alone, he has to do more, perhaps. For him to achieve his target, he needs to do perhaps about 9% GDP growth rate for the next quarter, Q3, and perhaps repeat the same thing in Q4 to meet his target of 6% as it was submitted to the National Assembly and approved.
Are you surprised that this economic growth was achieved in spite of the tough macroeconomic environment of the second quarter? Yes, inflation is still the elephant in the room, in the manner of speaking, the poison in a chalice cup, as it were. So, but again, of course, the second quarter was tough. We got quite a whole lot on our hands. Were you surprised that we managed to eke out 3.19%, in particular the service sector, 3.5%? Paul?
Now, when you look at this number, I will tell you I'm not surprised at all, because when you look at the role devaluation took here, Naira seems to be more. When you convert this number to the dollar, In fact, we will say that we have a negative growth, unfortunately, once this number is converted to the USD. But we stay with the number, we stay with the Naira. Then I tell you that I am not surprised as we would want to be. It's a tough time. But when you talk of macroeconomic environment, it's important for us to look at what are those key parameters and key indicators. Then we say that this number we are looking at, GDP, plays significant role. But it's not sufficient to look at GDP alone. We also must look at what is happening to inflation. We must look at what is happening to employment. We must also look at what is happening to trade. And most importantly, perhaps, we want to look at what is happening to exchange rates and a few other parameters. So here is it. Why we saw that for as at the end of second quarter, the inflation figure peaked. We don't know, but from what we saw from July report, that perhaps came down a little. But what we saw in second quarter, as at June, end of second quarter, inflation still went really high. Food inflation was at 40%. But thankfully, we saw what has happened in July. So when you look at all of these, compare that with unemployment figure that the Bureau of Statistics last reported, there is also increase about 5.2% compared to what we had in the previous year. Then you look at trade, especially when you look at it from the area of balance of payment, then you know that we need to do more. Yes, is it coming as a surprise? It is positive, but it's not strong enough. We need to do something significant to pull ourselves out of the corridor of our population growth rate. It is normal for economists to compare GDP numbers with population growth rate, so that as we are increasing in number and we're also increasing in economy, the economy does not swallow up all the things we might have had in terms of the population doesn't swallow up the things we have had in terms of economic growth. So when you look at this year on year compared to what we did in 2023 Q2, you see that it's only 21 basis point movement, but we'll need to do more. So I believe that the economic team will push further, perhaps to start seeing 6 to 9 to 12% if possible.
As the saying goes, that the devil is always in the details. Let's look at the agric sector. Of course, services sector grew 3.52%. That's agriculture, the agri sector, showing a decline of 8.57% between second quarter of last year to second quarter of this year. This figure does therefore validate that we are not doing enough as far as agriculture is concerned, leading to a very strong level of food inflation. We're talking about at least not imported food inflation, but at least inflation on the home front. How should the government take this number? Agriculture
I
doing just 1.4% of the GDP.
Yeah, I agree completely that government will need to do more. Perhaps state governors this time, beyond the federal government, must ensure that those farms are busy, those farms are accessible, and there is output to increase what we are currently doing. Because at this time where we have high food prices, and this report is telling us, hey, instead of blame game, this is where your problem is coming from. Your output, your growth in terms of that's agriculture, are significantly reduced. You might see the number being positive, but in the real sense, the number is not positive. The number may look positive, but you are doing less than what you did at this time last year. So government must take this very seriously if truly we want to end food inflation. We saw what happened in July, which of course reflected harvest of output within that month. But we had other months whereby the inflation figures, especially as it affects food, was really high. Combine that with what Bureau of Statistics released today. It is obvious and it is clear that one of the key reasons why we have food inflation is because food output, agro output has significantly been affected. And when you look at the drop in growth as its contribution to GDP, you agree with me that largely government needs to do more. And this may be in form of security, this may be in form of providing fertilizers for farmers, this may be in form of being deliberate or have organized farm structure. And I've said that President Tinubu and his team may even organize farm ops dedicated deliberately by government, adding core members and a few other persons who are willing to be free volunteers to work on farm. Of course, they will be paid so that we can boost this output once and for all and look at key food that we consume and make all of those available in the coming period.
Yes, interesting. And just to support that on my end, if it can just be supported by security forces for those farm hubs, I think we can use some police, Mopol, whatever we call them, soldiers, to support those farms, support those
civil
youth
defense,
corps and civil defense and all of that, fully
also
armed, and they can support those hectares, thousands of hectares of farm as hubs across the country, at least sterilize them from the hands of the militants and those deadly folks. But again, if the agriculture picture was bad, I think the manufacturing picture was heartbroken for me for this second quarter report. Nominal GDP of manufacturing sector in the second quarter was 1.9%. Now, that's straight between the eyes for me, as it were. 27.99% lower than the figure reported in second quarter last year. So it means by April and June last year to April and June this year, our manufacturing and industrial sector fell by roughly 28%. That's what it means. Now, hold on a second before you respond. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, between first quarter this year and second quarter, that is between January and March and April and June, manufacturing sector recorded a negative 11.25%. Talk to me.
Well, a lot to worry about when it comes to manufacturing industry. Completely it has been dwarfed by service and, of course, a twin brother here, which is agriculture. Unfortunately, I must tell you that without boosting that sector, there is no economic hope for Nigeria. The real economic hope will come when we start making significant output, first in agriculture, and secondly in manufacturing. And there must be no lag between the two. They must be hand in hand. And I've said time and again that why are we having this reduced output in manufacturing? We need to look at first energy sector that propels manufacturing, cost of diesel, cost of electricity. When you look at the cost that goes to manufacturers these days in terms of electricity bill, then you know that how to produce it costs for concern. 1, 2, look at some industry that are producing in Nigeria. They have also left. So their contribution to GDP has left with them. That is why we are seeing some kind of reduction in this manufacturing sector. So for me, we need to do everything possible to boost output, especially in the area of manufacturing.
Okay, great. So the presidency has issued a press statement just as these GDP numbers came out. They praised, they clapped for the 3.1% GDP growth. They said, government says it's a testimony that the current economic policies are on track. How do you respond? It says that we're going to see, Nigeria is going to feel and see the impact of the economic policies of the current government when agriculture is down to 1.4%, manufacturing down roughly 28%. What does that mean?
Well, I really don't know, but I believe that those that are economists within government might want to have a different position. But it's also good to play the devil's advocate. It's a positive GDP. Thankfully, it's not negative. So that in itself, it calls for good news. We need to share about that. But to share about this kind of growth, which is really marginal and it's also very fragile, we need to do that with a lot of caution.
All right, so we have a GDP growth of 3.1% in second quarter, inflation down in the month of July. How should the central bank decide? Cardoso and the rest of his team, September 24, we're just 30 days to that, on interest rate. Where should I go? Is that a knife ready for the bottom?
For me, I've always advocated that the Monetary Policy Committee and indeed the central bank should not increase rate further. A further increase in rates might have negative implication, one on GDP. Secondly, it might also affect investment. Already it has affected investment. So if we continue to increase rates, hoping that it will tame down inflation, we could see the reduction in inflation was not as a result of rate adjustment, it was as a result of harvest season, because food inflation was a major contributor to reduction in inflation. So my advice to Mr. Cardoso and his team is take some caution, especially when it comes to the appetite to increase rate further. It's okay where it is. Let us watch it. It's a time for us to take precaution from what the GDP number is saying, and perhaps we watch 2 more inflation number, because we cannot tell yet until we see 2 more movements in inflation. Whether we saw the point of the peak point of inflation as of June 2024, or what we saw was just a shift and it may go back again. So it will be too hasty for us to say, let's further increase rates or let's reduce rates.
Okay.
This is the
So
time
you
when
vote-
we wait to check what the numbers.
So you're voting for a hold on September 24, technically speaking. That's it. Yes or no?
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's a yes.
Absolutely, a hold. That's what I vote for.
All right. Thank you so
That's
much.
a yes, yes.
Yeah, both of us
Yes.
are going to be outside the door when the decision has been taken. Well, of course, as you said, it's a hold. We take that as an economist
Yes.
from you. Thank you so much, as always, for your perspectives and insights on matters of national economic importance. Have a great evening, and see you again soon. Alaje, policy analyst and senior economist at SPM Professionals in our Abuja studios. We'll be right back.